Okay, thank you, Shelley. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Andy Reti. Andy is a childhood survivor of the Holocaust. There's a short bio piece in the program today you can read on your own if you wish. However, he's here to tell his story, and I'm not going to take any more of his time. So, Andy, the podium is all yours.
Thank you. Shalom, good afternoon, and thank you. Thank you for helping to honor my mother, and what an unbelievable occasion, her 6 million sisters and brothers. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I am considered a Holocaust educator, but I have never been to an incredible venue like this. I have never had the privilege of celebrating Yom HaShoah, Holocaust remembrance, together with such an incredible and wide-ranging audience. During those presentations, I am often asked many, many questions. One of them was courage, and you had just witnessed it. She just lost her husband. What an incredible, incredible courage it is. My presentation is called The Ring of Love. I am wearing that ring of love. Hopefully you'll have a chance to look at it, but if not, we do have a picture of it. This is an eyewitness to history, an artifact, a true survival of the atrocities. Now, as I mentioned, I have been doing this for over 20 years, and I cannot get over my incredible, incredible impression of you wonderful people who have been doing this for so many years together with the Jewish community. And I understand that previously you had some of the speakers that I consider to be my friends. That included Faye Libman, Ellie Gotts, and a lot of others. These survivors have one thing and one thing in common. In fact, every survivor has something in common. One is their incredible courage and will to survive and to live. And the other one is that they all talked about the constant hunger. My story is called The Ring of Love. And usually I present this to students, and I ask a young student sitting in the front, what is the opposite to love? And of course the answer is hate. But Simon Wiesenthal said, another definition, it is indifference. Think about it. Think about it. Love, hate, and indifference. These are all human emotions, and hopefully in the 28 minutes I have left, I'll be able to bridge them for you. My presentation usually is a bit longer than 30 minutes, but I'll try to do it. I had the privilege of working together with my mother for a number of years. I was her docent on a few occasions, which is in Latin for museum guide, because similar to what you have outside here, we have an exhibit. And this is a portrait of her from a book of Holocaust survivor pictures. And this is what she wrote in her own handwriting. I was very bitter for many long years, but you can't live with hatred in your heart all the time. But to forgive, I can't. And I can't forget it either. The hurt deep in my heart will stay with me till the day I die. She died of very young, 88. She lived the way she died, with incredible courage and tenacity. She had defeated cancer once, and she only succumbed to it the second time. I held her hand, and I never forget it. Now, I did mention to you about some of the speakers on purpose, because I want to tell you, having listened to their stories, I came to my own conclusion that every Holocaust survivor story is a love story. Love of life, love of family, and love of freedom. And I will show this to you in the 27 minutes I have left. This is the ring, in case if you will not see it personally. And I'd like to draw your attention specifically to the necklace. The ring itself is on that necklace. And the necklace, and I'm sure all of you know this, is high. Het and Yud, the Hebrew letters forming high, meaning 18. And I'm going to show you the incredible number 18 throughout my presentation, which I didn't realize until I put the story together. Now, as a background, you had the video about 1939 and the Hungarian Jews. My parents got married in 1939, which was an incredible coincidence. And they were two ordinary young people living ordinary lives. They were really passionately and madly in love with each other. The custom at the time in most of Europe was that if you got married, you had used your wedding band as an engagement ring, but you put it on your right hand, and when you got married, you moved it to your left hand. Now, I forgot to tell you, forgive me, that the story you're about to hear is our story. Mostly my mother's, but mine as well, because I was there with her. And as hard as it seems to believe, I do have two personal recollections of the Holocaust, which I will share with you in a moment. And you forgive me for one more second, I forgot to bring my material. I was sitting on the left and this was on the right. So they got married in 1939. Yes, just not this, just that. Thank you. Technical difficulties. And the wedding ring was used. As I said, it was the custom at the time. But even if they wanted to, they couldn't afford fancy diamond rings because they were really, really dirt poor. And my mother was an incredible woman, an extraordinary woman who was blessed with a number of abilities. She wrote a book titled An Ordinary Woman in Extraordinary Times, used at York University in Toronto for 10 years as text. I can tell you my incredible honor and privilege that while she was still alive, I was able to write a sequel to it called The Son of an Extraordinary Woman. And the greatest honor came in 2006, 11 years after she passed away, that the Israeli Foundation published the two books under the title Stronger Together. And it was titled such before Hillary appropriated it. So 1939, that is the beginning of our story. My mother was from the capital of a province of Baranya, which is Pécs, close to the Yugoslavian border. These are my maternal grandparents, in 1942, the year I was born. And because Hungary at the time was an ally of Germany, the entire Jewish population of Hungary was intact. No major atrocities, no real atrocities and murders took place until spring and summer of 1944. And yet, between 1944 and 1945, proportionately, numerically, as the documentary mentioned, 450,000 Jews were murdered, which is more than the combined territories before them. They were so intent on murdering Jews that they actually used the moving stock, the rails, to take the Jews away to their death rather than supplying their own troops. So that was the year I was born, 1942. My grandparents did get to know me, but I never got to know them. My paternal grandparents, with whom I lived all my life until we left for Canada in 1956, were the other part of the family, and they did survive. But my mother's incredible courage, together with my grandmother's incredible courage, is the key here. Now, way before our Prime Minister declared himself to be a feminist, I've been telling my audience for years that I love women. Young, old, middle-aged. I'm in awe of women. I firmly believe that they are the stronger race. I firmly believe that they are more courageous than men. And you will see it in a few minutes. 25 minutes? Age 31, 5'10", second generation swimming instructor. The love of his life, 5'0", and the product of their love. Fat, blonde, blue-eyed. Something's changed, something didn't. So our story begins, in reality, in a small village of Recknitz, Austria, which is in Austria today. But over the years, the borders in Europe shifted so many times and so often. At one time, it was part of Hungary called Rohonc, and at another time, it was Recknitz. I never got to go there until 2016, when the launching of my book gave me one last concentrated effort to look for a childhood friend. I went with my lovely wife, Judy, with whom I have been together for 18 years, and she's here somewhere. I haven't seen her yet. Oh, thank you. So we went there, and you see Judy and I in front of a brick wall. This brick wall was a brick factory, very similar to where we were back in Hungary. Now, the reason I say that our story started in Recknitz, because I was born as Recknitzer András. Recknitz is the village, Recknitzer is the villager, and the name was changed only after liberation, not to sound so Jewish, not to sound so easily identifiable. Of course, it didn't help, because in 1956, when we left Hungary, we already had graffiti on the wall. Itzig, nem kell menni Auschwitzig. Jews, you don't have to go to Auschwitz. We'll take care of you right here, right now. 1956, 11 years after the Holocaust. Now, the rabbi just talked about hate. He mentioned that there are people who want us to hate each other. No, no, no. Not only because we are in a special house of God, not only because we are men and women of goodwill, but because that is our humanity. I'm not a particularly religious person. In fact, I was so anti-religious because of my grandfather that I didn't have my grandfather present at my bar mitzvah, which is the greatest event in a Jewish boy's life. I'll come to that too. I know we're running out of time. He was a communist, and he didn't show up to his grandson's bar mitzvah. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not particularly religious, but I do believe in a supreme being above us. I do believe that the greatest gift from God is our ability to choose. We can choose to do evil, or we can choose to do the right thing. Now, I had a little bit of a time to talk to some of the leadership, including Pastor Jack, and I said that in all my presentations, I include the fact that if you leave today and you forget everything you heard, but just remember one thing and one thing only, you have learned something. And that one thing is the fact that it happened because good people stood by. It happens because people step back instead of step up. You can be a bystander or you can be an upstander. Now, I mentioned the previous speakers. Another common denominator was that all of us, survivors, without fail, had survived because of the act of kindness of at least one stranger, sometimes on multiple occasions, sometimes more than one stranger. Our story is no exception. So even though it goes back,
we had to go out front of the house and form a line, 5 of us. And as I said, I just grabbed the knapsack, which there are a little tea or crackers or apple and things for the baby. And I grabbed one blanket and we went out. At that time, my father-in-law was still home. On the street, if I was not there, I would not believe what the people did to us. All those people from the neighboring house, the hairdresser whom I went every 2 weeks, they all lined up on the sidewalk. They were happy. They were spot on us. They said ugly words. They grabbed anything they could. One smashed my father-in-law's eyeglasses. The other took off a coat from a man's shoulder. The other one grabbed out the blanket from my hand. And there is only one voice among the thousands and thousands of onlookers who said, "Can't you see this is for a baby? Give it back." But of course, I was not allowed to even look back, not to wait for the blanket. And I was wondering, who could be that one person who spoke up?
one person who spoke up. Now again, forgive me a little bit because we're a bit out of sync here. Because what I didn't tell you was that October 15, 1944, there was an announcement by the Regent of Hungary that we are not going to be fighting with the Germans. Remember, Hungary was an ally. This happiness lasted for 1 day because the following day he was pushed out of power. On October 16, the Hungarian Nazi Party, the Aerocross Party, took power. And that is when our Shoah, our Holocaust, started. By that time, both my father and grandfather were taken away to a forced labor battalion of the Hungarian army. They were not allowed to carry weapons. They were only allowed to wear partial uniforms and they were made to do menial tasks, digging ditches, kitchen duty, etc., but no weapons. So there were only the three of us back home, and this was the apartment that we lived in. No. Oops. Okay. If those of you who have been to Europe, you can imagine it, or you have seen it. The courtyard is open, it's an open atrium, and all the apartment buildings go around it. So our apartment was the very first one that if you came into the building. So we had a knock on the door, and we were given 5 minutes to pack up. Only thing take with you that you can carry. And this is when my mother's incredible prescience and foresight came in. She had to carry the baby, me, and she asked my grandmother, no matter what happens, to follow us. Now you can imagine, because it's human nature, to live in a neighborhood that you're comfortable with. We lived in the heart of the Jewish neighborhood. Every apartment building had a majority of Jewish population, up to 70-75%. So we were rounded up, and in no time at all, hundreds, thousands of people were made to march down the street. In about 20 minutes, a procession was halted, an order was given that every piece of valuable that you had to be handed over. It was a blanket on the ground. My mother was so in love with this wonderful man that you had just seen, that at the risk of her life and my life, decided not to hand over her ring. And usually I look at young people, so I'm going to choose a very young lady. Where would you hide that ring if you had a baby in your hand and you were to hide it?
Maybe in his diaper.
You read my book. That's exactly where that ring was hidden, in the diaper. Now, in a lot of customs, in a lot of folklore, a lot of custom, it is said that if you touch poo-poo, caca, manure, it brings you good luck. So I'm going to show you that this ring had brought us its share of good luck. But indeed, that's what happened. We were robbed. And then, after we were robbed, we were forced to go on, and we had no idea where. The weather in Hungary is very similar to what we have here in Canada. And October is damp, rainy, miserable. We were taken to an open-air racetrack, and thousands of people were made to fill the open-air infield. No food, no water, no facilities. This was on October 16. We were there October 17, October 18, 3 o'clock in the morning, the light comes on, and the announcement says, you can go home. But before we got that far, one of the many miracles happened. One of the many miracles that shows that humanity can be found anywhere and everywhere. Now, I'm particularly pleased that the chief of police is here, because I had the privilege of talking to some police officers over the years. And I make sure that we understand that a policeman has a duty to obey orders. But the policeman also has a duty to be a human being. So my grandmother recognized a young policeman from her hometown, and she walked over to him, and she begged him to help. This officer could easily have said, I don't know you, get back in the line, I want nothing to do with you. But this police officer was a human being first. And he said, you see that group over there? Make sure you don't get mixed up with them, because they'll be taken to Auschwitz. And by that time we knew what Auschwitz was. So we avoided the first selection. And we made it to October 18, 3 o'clock in the morning. As we are leaving with our backs turned, people on either side of us were murdered because they had a machine gun, but somehow we managed to stay alive. So what happens? Well, we go home. Our freedom was only 2 days when we had rounded up again. Excuse me. The same process. We rounded up and taken this time to a brick factory where we are separated, and after that we're taken to the ghetto of Budapest. Now, in every country there were many ghettos, including Budapest. There were a number of different homes that were designated as ghettos. We were taken to number 9 Acacia Street. What's half of 18? 9. We're still alive. We're okay. We happened to be taken to an apartment building identical to where we lived, designed for 300 people. Well over 2,000 were crowded in there. We were assigned a 2-room apartment. That's 2 rooms only. The facilities were down the hallway, common washroom. And we had 27 people crowded into this small space. Out of the 27, 7 were children, all under the age of 7. My mother was together with her best friend and the 2 mothers. I only found out recently that actually her husband and my father were together in the same labor battalion. But her best friend had a little baby who's 6 months older than I was. And we were in the ghetto together. Now, I mentioned to you that I have 2 personal recollections. And one of them is that my little friend Katie was with me because the 2 mothers were able to commandeer a fold-out Chesterfield. The 2 mothers were on the outside. The 2 babies were between the 2 mothers, touching feet to feet. And my little friend Katie had the coldest feet in the universe. I remember it. My dear wife has a cold feet. And to this day, if she even comes near me, I jump. Human nature, it's in me. And she loves putting her cold feet against me. So this is my first recollection of the ghetto. The other one is sadly also missing, but when we get lemons, we make lemonade. We can go back. I have a feeling that it's missing altogether. Okay, it doesn't really matter. Okay, thank you. I felt it. Oh, okay, it's there. Sorry, thank you. Okay, there is my little friend Katie. And we lost touch with each other, but in 2016, I went back, one last attempt to find her, and lo and behold, I find her. She's still curly-haired, blonde, and blue-eyed. And I got to tell you, because I say this to every audience, our revenge on the Nazis is that we became grandfathers and grandmothers. So when I went back to meet my long-lost childhood friend, from then on, 2016, every email and every Skype messages, this is your cold-footed friend here. But that is what happened. So the other memory is of our liberation. Would anybody like to guess on what day in January we were liberated? January 18. And this is my recollection. But it is written with my mother's own words. So I'm going to read it to you because, forgive me, my memory is not even close to as what my mother's is. She wrote a poem called Hunger, but she wrote it about me. Mommy, please give me a little piece of bread. I am hungry, very hungry. Just this little, Mommy. My 2-year-old puts his 2 tiny fingers together, showing me just how little he wanted. Tomorrow, my son, tomorrow, maybe the war will be over and you will have all the bread you want. Hush, hush, little one, go to sleep. Don't cry. Mommy will hold you and sing you a lullaby. The next day comes and goes, but no food, only hopes. Hopes that tomorrow we could be free. The following morning, indeed, we hear noises, different voices. We all rush to the courtyard, and there he is, a Russian soldier who just liberated us. I beg him with sign language, with tears running down my cheek, please give me some bread. My baby is starving to death. The soldier reaches into his pocket and puts a roll in my hand. As I give it to my child, he looks at it with wide, unbelieving eyes, then laughing and crying and jumping with joy, he bites into the beautiful white roll. It was dark. I remember it. Russians do not have white bread. They had Russian bread, black rye bread. So I remember it. So January 18, we're liberated. Now, because I'm trying to make the 30-minute deadline, I didn't tell you a very important date. December 25, 1944. The day that my grandfather, who was able to escape from his labor battalion, found us. He found his way into the ghetto, which was a great relief to all of us, causing one problem, one more mouth to feed. So on January 18, 1945, we were lucky. We were lucky that we were liberated by the Russians, because on that day, my grandfather fainted from hunger, and because the Russians knew how to treat people with starvation, they were able to revive him. I have a first cousin who survived Bergen-Belsen, 18 years of age, and he perished because the Americans did not know how to handle people with starvation. Their starving stomachs could not handle it. So he gorged himself on food and he passed away. But we were saved by the Russians. So you have to understand that the Russians who came and forced a communist system on us were not my enemies. I had no ill feelings towards the Russians. They saved us. But life goes on. This is on my 3rd birthday, just after liberation. And this is a year after, in 1946, and you can still see that we're all skin and bones. But life goes on. What happens? If you noticed, there is one person missing from that picture. The center of our universe. The husband, the father, the son. He did not survive. I was told all my life that he died of typhus. And if you can recall that picture of this beautiful man, age 31, 5'10", in the prime of his life, I just could not relate to the fact that he would succumb to such an ugly disease as typhus. But our life goes on. I lived with my grandparents from the moment I was born. We were lucky that we were able to continue living with them after the war. And I was already groomed to be a swimmer. I had hopes of becoming an Olympic swimmer. At age 14, the year we left Hungary, I in fact did win a national championship for my age group in both individual and relay. And before you ask me which one am I, the best looking one. So 1956, the year the Hungarian October Revolution starts, we escape the communist paradise, and my mother and I make our way to Canada, who welcomed us with open arms. Our first visit back to my father's grave was in 1974. It's only a marker because there are no human remains there. In Jewish tradition, if a person dies, they have to be buried within 24 hours. And within 1 year, a monument or a stone or a marker has to be erected. We have no idea where his remains are. We have no idea where he was murdered. However, I mentioned at the beginning that I'm going to show you the human emotion. The entrance to the cemetery says, hatred had killed them. May love cherish their memory. There it is, those two incredible emotions. This is in 2016 when I went back with my lovely wife. And this is the entrance to his section where it says, Akfalba, 820 known, 224 unknown. This is where they are memorialized. Now, I mentioned at the beginning about the bar mitzvah being a very important milestone in a Jewish boy's life. For those of you who don't know, bar mitzvah literally means son of the covenant. At age 13, a boy is allowed to recite from the sacred Torah, and it is a huge family celebration. When we came to Canada in 1957, my mother married a fellow survivor and married him in 1958, who became our wonderful Papa Emil. My 2 children did not know any other grandfathers because sadly, my dear wife's father, also a survivor, passed away at age 63 during the horrors that he had suffered. But he was a partisan. He fought against the Nazis. He was very proud of that, and we were very proud of him. This is at my son's bar mitzvah. So you can imagine what an incredible day this is. And you see me on the back, and the person standing next to me was a first cousin to my father, who was together with him. And this is the first time I met him because he came all the way from Israel for this really special occasion. So during that lull in the ceremony, I asked him, Cousin Harry, I understand you were together with my father. How is it that you survived and he did not? And I was told all my life that he died of typhus. He looked me in the eye and he said, you are right. He did not die of typhus. So what happened? What happened was that they could hear the approaching gunfight, and Harry asked my father to escape with him. And my father said, Harry, you don't have a family. If we get caught, we'll be shot. I have Ibi and Andy waiting for me. I can't take a chance. I can't tell you the emotional shock to find out on my son's bar mitzvah that my father died because he loved. How different our lives could have been had he lived, had he survived. I am sure he had the courage to escape. But he didn't want to escape. He didn't want to risk his family. He sacrificed for his family. This took me a long, long time to understand and to process. One of the reasons I do what I do is to make sure that this kind of blind hatred will not occur again. This is the reason my generation swore never again. So I can't tell you the emotional shock that I am experiencing every time I hear of these hate crimes, of these atrocities. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that I'm not a particularly religious person, but I do believe in the supremacy of the God above us. During my over 20 years, I heard many questions, and one of them is, where was God during the Holocaust? And the answer is not the question, but the answer is, where was man during the Holocaust? So for me, what I'm doing, it's getting a little bit more difficult year after year, but I hope to do it for a few more years, along with another undertaking. Now, this is the picture that got back to us. It was found in his wallet. We have no idea how it got back to us. So you can imagine my extreme pleasure that the publishers chose to put that on the picture of the book. But not too many people can make this statement. I am a biker because of my mother and the Holocaust. In fact, I haven't come across anybody who's a biker because of their mother and the Holocaust. How am I now? This always gets the kids going, at least their attention. I'm a biker because of my mother and the Holocaust and her incredible pedagogy and motherly instinct. This is a birthday gift for my 8th birthday. But on my 6th birthday, she allowed me to go on a full-size motorcycle in a small amusement park. Now, usually she has an incredible, incredible memory, and she did not remember that she allowed me to go on a motorcycle. So you can imagine, when at age 60, as an engagement gift to my bride-to-be, I bought a brand new motorcycle. So when she found out that I bought a motorcycle, she goes like this. 2 minutes. When she comes up, she says, how can you do such a bad thing to me? I said, I'm not dead yet. But I did buy a motorcycle. My lovely bride rode with me for 5 years. Until I put her in the ditch once too often. But nevertheless, this is where the ring of love comes in. In 2005, which was the year my dear mother passed away, I joined a Jewish motorcycle club, Yaus, Yidden on Wheels. And we had our first ever Ride to Remember. And the caption says, we ride to remember so that world will not forget. When I had the horrible task of cleaning out my mother's apartment, I came across the necklace with the ring on it, and I decided to make it into a showpiece that I only wear on Holocaust education presentations, weddings, bar mitzvahs, and sadly, lately, more and more funerals. And because it's a large ring, it did not fit under the glove. So I had no choice but to put it inside my vest. And There is a saying that there are only two kinds of motorcycle riders. One who's already gone down and kissed the ground, and one who's about to. Well, let me tell you, when you hit the ditch at 60, something happens. Either you or the bike or both, but not this time, because I had the ring of love next to my heart. Now, would you all please stand up for a minute? The Right to Remember started in 2005, and in 2017, we went to New York City, and I have this plaque on my bike at every Right to Remember, which is a copy of the portrait that my mother has at Toronto's Holocaust Center. We also had a fully ordained rabbi, this Hillel's angel-looking dude is a fully ordained rabbi. That is a Torah on his motorcycle that was smuggled out of Germany, but because it's not kosher, it's not being able to be used in services, but it's an artifact. In 2012, I had the honor of reciting the pledge on the hills of Parliament, and I'd like you to repeat it with me. It's called the pledge. My name is Andy Reti, a young child Holocaust survivor and a member of the Young Motorcycle Club of Toronto. Less than 70 years ago, the world of 6 million Jewish people, including my own father, came to an end that is so evil that the only word that can describe it is Holocaust. I stand before you as a witness and a free man to tell all, never again. Never again to any and all genocides. Never again to racial hatred. Never again to a second Holocaust. Please take this pledge with me. We pledge to speak up against hatred and racism. We pledge to remember. Please put your hand over your heart and say, we pledge never again. Thank you.